Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our 2024 Division B and C Coach Clinic here at Virginia Science Olympiad. If you don't know me, my name is Emily Owens, and I'm the State Director. Joining me today is Karen Emmons, who is State Director Emeritus, and also one of our awesome building and event supervisors, our treasurer. And so she's going to be joining me today to also talk about some build event stuff with you. So without further ado, let's take a look at our agenda, what we're going to be talking about here in the next 2 hours. For approximately the first hour, we are going to be looking at events and how to read rules and clarifications, which are very important. We're going to break it down into looking at knowledge events, chemistry events, or hands-on events, and build events to give you all some support in how you can guide your students through reading these rules, practicing for these events to feel prepared for their tournaments. And then in the second hour, we are going to be looking at more just about preparing for and competing in tournaments, namely some important policies and procedures that you should be aware of to share out with your students and team parents. We'll look at what a tournament day feels like in a sample schedule. And at the end, we'll also just talk about arbitration, just kind of give you a full picture of what's to come. Keep in mind that at this point, we've kind of already done our registration talks with our kickoff meeting and our new coach Q&A. So if you have registration questions, feel free to reach out to me via email, or we can talk after this session. But our focus today is mainly going to be, so you have a team, now what? And so hopefully even for veteran coaches, we'll give you some great information about events that are specific to this year, particularly in that build realm of events. We had some good questions and some great answers coming from Karen that you'll hear later on. Okay. Just to kind of give us an idea of where we're at. So if your team has not yet completed registration, that is still, of course, open. It's open until December 8th. But you've hopefully also started to gather your team through an interest meeting, through tryouts, whatever that looks like for your school. And then we're kind of in the phase where we're finalizing that participant group and moving toward assigning events to participants and getting them started with practicing for those events. So knowing that we're, whether your team already has like a completed roster or you're still kind of figuring out your final group of students, we're all kind of in that realm of like, yes, we're doing Science Olympiad, but maybe not at the part yet where our students are fully into events and like reading rules and practicing for them and so forth. We know that comes a little bit later. You got to get all the logistics sorted out first. A few things I did want to highlight in the like second half of the year, which for us is like the official tournament part of the year. There are some invitational tournaments that are open for registration and are happening before our regionals. We've got for Division B, the Lake Braddock Invitational on December 9th. And in Division C, there's the Fairfax Invitational and the Virginia Tech Invitationals, both in person. Fairfax January 6th, Virginia Tech January 27th. But our regional season does not start until February 10th, which if you've been following along in some emails we've pushed out to you, is a change from what we previously had. We had intended to have a tournament at Charlottesville High School on February 3rd. Charlottesville, unfortunately, cannot host us any longer. So we have now moved that to February 10th at Centerville High School. That is the first tournament of the season. Also in that email that announced that change for Centerville, if you caught it at the very end there, we have a state date. It is April 6th at UVA. So that's just giving you the updated picture of what's to come. But, while we are registering to go to regionals, no one's really in regionals mode yet. We're still wrapping our brains around events. And so that's where we're going to begin for our clinic today. A couple of reminders as we talk about events today, that events are in set blocks of time. So as you're thinking about what events your students are doing, please make sure that you are not double booking a student and putting them in 2 events that are in the same group. The events document that is on our website on the events portion, other direction of the site. So on events, you go to event conflicts, takes you to the document that has those event groupings and conflicts. So you could be referencing that as you're doing the part of assigning students to events. We're going to talk about the meat of what the events are, but this is your reference document as you're figuring out who's doing what. It also does indicate one of the changes that was also mentioned in the regionals change, which is that flight, you'll notice, is now red coded, like meteorology, experimental design, microbe mission for Division B. Previously, it was blue because it meant we were going to try to run it at some of the regionals, but Charlottesville had honestly been our main hope for using their big gym space to run flight. And so we've had to adjust that now. And we have decided that we are going to make flight a states only event, so it will not run at any regional. So that is the only change on that document since we released it in early September. But I just wanted to make sure everyone had seen that. It was emailed, but it's also reflected on that document. Okay. So in these clusters, there are a variety of different types of events, as you likely know. We have knowledge events, we have hands-on events, we have build events, particularly in the self-scheduled list. And all of them kind of come with, different parameters that are all outlined in the rule book. And so this is the Division C as well, just to refresh your memory on their groupings. And so we're going to be, instead of looking at events in these groups, because these are just like the time block groups, we're going to look at them in terms of their event type and give you some tips of how to guide your students in preparing for a knowledge event versus a hands-on event versus a build event. Okay. Some reminders related to that as we're going through this. We're going to be referencing the rule book. The rule book, of course, covers all the events. Some of the events in that rule book are trial events. We don't do those unless we announce them, some of them for state, but no trial events at regionals. There's also states only events clearly in that book, but even the ones we do talk about, like all of them on this list, you don't have to do all of them. Your team decides, you decide. So keep that in mind, especially as we have coaches that have different backgrounds. We have teams schools that field 3 teams with full 45 students, and we have schools that are just starting out maybe with 5 students. And so what one team asks about or says that they do doesn't necessarily mean it's what you have to do. So just keep that in mind. Also, for our new teams, a reminder that each team only sends one set of students to compete in each event. If your school has one team, that means only 2 students who are working in a pair would compete in something like anatomy. If your school has more teams, let's say your school fields 3 teams, that means 2 students from each team can compete in anatomy. It's not just 6 total students. It's 2 students from team A and 2 students from team B and 2 students from team C. Okay. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about builds today because that takes a different set of skills, both from, coaches and mentors, but also from students. And so especially if you're starting out or your students are starting out new to Science Olympiad, build events are one of the, supremely popular for our budding engineers. But we suggest not giving a student more than 1 build event to start out if they're new to it. Obviously, if they have experience with it, they may be able to handle more. But those are just some things to keep in mind as you're thinking about what events might fit well for certain students based on what you've seen from them, either in a tryout or what they've expressed on an interest form. If you haven't already, really encourage you to download the rulebook for your respective division. There's a link to do that via our website. It takes you to nationals, but you should be going to virginiaso.org for all of your Science Olympiad needs. And so it will link you to nationals for you to download them, and your students can download them, your families can download them. I have mine saved on my desktop. So if that's something you haven't done yet, it'd be really helpful for you to do that, especially with what we're talking about today, that you can take, the tips that we're giving you and start to actually look at those rules a little bit with your students. So having that copy is helpful. After you've gone through the process of figuring out what events your students are going to do, which we know can be a long process, as you get to know your students, as you figure out like what your team can reasonably handle, how you're going to distribute that workload, etc. But after you've at least assigned them to events, your students need to get to know the rules, to know what they're going to be doing in the events. They need to thoroughly read them and read them multiple times over. And especially for our younger groups, this may require adult support to help them with that. Our C competitors can usually handle that on their own or with their partners, but may even still need guidance in some capacities. But what we're going to be focusing on is the questions that you can lead them through to get what they need from the rules, right? What information do they have to learn for the event? Or what device do they have to build? And what are the parameters for that? What tasks do they have to practice? Those are going to be the things that the event rules give you. And of course, those events change every year. So even our events that are there every year, like anatomy or disease detectives or chem lab, the topics change, the tasks change, like the focus changes. So we have to be familiar with the rules every year. And then of course we have brand new events, or events that haven't been in the rotation for a while, like ones coming back like optics and wind power, that you may remember doing them as a coach many, many years ago, but they've changed or you need a refresher. Taking the time for our students and for us to look through the rules is how we set up our seasons for success. So this is just an overview of the key information in the rules that you should be directing your students to get from it, right? First, number of students per team. There are some events that are 3-person events, namely Codebusters. Experimental design is also a 3-person event, but that's a states only event. So most events are 2 people, but you got to know which ones you put a 3rd person on. We're going to talk today about the types of goggles and safety equipment, and reading that in the rules and like, what does that mean, especially for our teachers who may not, work in science only classrooms. We'll look at calculators because that will change by event. It'll tell you other permitted event materials. So what can they bring with them, whether it's a binder or a field guide or a piece of paper that they've written on. That will change by event. And then it'll give you, for a written test, it'll tell you, here are the topics that are on the written test. For a device that you have to build, it'll give you the parameters and goals for building the device. If it's a task-based event that you don't necessarily have to build something for, but they have to perform a task, it'll outline what that task is. And then for all events, it tells you how they're scored. And that's at the very end. So the entire picture of an event is in that rule sheet and is ultimately what we look to as event supervisors, as test writers, as tournament personnel to guide how we implement an event on tournament day. So we're going to start by talking about core knowledge events. These events are ones that are just going to have usually a written test. It could be a station-based test, but it's those events that we think of that can be like identifications, right? Like fossils or forestry. Anatomy is one that is popular year to year where they're learning about different body systems, but that's symbolized by this little picture in the rule book. So they've kind of clustered them in the rule book based on what each event entails. And so I'm going to walk you through the main parts of a core knowledge event and give you a little bit of guidance you can pass on to your students of how to prepare for one of these. So like I mentioned before, these rules will tell you how many students can participate in that event. So it's always listed right toward the top under the description. It will say a team of up to. This one is 2 people. Most of them are 2, but you just want to double check. Codebusters is 3. And there are other events year to year that sometimes will have 3 people, or if you're going to invitationals that may have funky trial events. Just that's something you just want to double check just in case, right? And then right under that, for every event sheet has the parameters of what they're allowed to bring. So for anatomy, it says that each team can bring one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that may contain information on both sides in any form and from any source. And then they can also bring some calculators. So this part, even though it's listed first or like toward the top, is not something that they can do before they read the rest of it, right? That cheat sheet that they make of that information is going to be informed by the competition parameters, by the topics that are listed. And that's actually going to be part of their studying that they do to prepare for the event, is that as they research and learn about that information, they can then build their sheet of information. And we'll talk more about that. But for right now, I want to focus on the next part of the event parameters, which is the calculator part. So many of our events allow calculators. There are some that don't allow calculators at all, but many of them allow some form of a calculator. And for anatomy, they're allowed 2 standalone, non-programmable, non-graphing calculators. And then it says class 2. Well, if you're not as familiar with like what non-programmable or non-graphing means, in the rule book, toward the back of the rule book, I've actually put the page numbers. For the B rule book, it's 79 and 80. And for the C rule book, it's 84 and 85. There's a page about calculator class descriptions. Okay. And so you can see that class 1 is essentially a 4 or 5 function calculator. And they've given like an example picture of one, or they could even be much smaller than that. But class 2, which is what's allowed for anatomy, is essentially a scientific calculator. It's not a graphing calculator with the big screen on it. But the scientific ones that are going to have more functions available might have like a log button or an exponent button when the for function doesn't have that. And it gives you some example models like the TI-30X. Okay. So that type of calculator then matches with what's allowed in the anatomy event. So as a coach, depending on like what resources your students have, you may have a team set of different types of calculators, or you may be asking your students, hey, if you're in this event, you're going to need this type of calculator. I know that I actually, when I was coaching, had more of an issue with like a lot of my students had graphing calculators, and they wouldn't always have a non-graphing scientific calculator, but many of my longtime science Olympians would end up just buying one because they were in enough events that like they wanted their own for class 2. And like I always had just a couple little like 4 function calculators that I would bring with me to tournaments. So it's not necessarily that like you're expected to provide all the calculators for all the events, but if a student doesn't have a class 2 and they have a class 3 calculator, which is a graphing calculator, they could not use that in the anatomy event. And so knowing that in advance, they can like either as a team or as an individual procure the right type of calculator. Okay. You'll notice that class 4 includes calculator applications on multipurpose devices. These are like pretty much never allowed. So just kind of keep that in mind that, sometimes our students are used to just pulling out their phones and using calculators on them, and that's like not allowed. So the calculator guide makes that very clear. On top of that, they also have this calculator and events matrix, which is on the second page. So B80 and C85. And it tells you, just as a quick glance, I think this is most useful as a coach, like which events require which type of calculator. And note that there are none, this is division B, there are none that use the class 4 calculator here. But this is going to be a good segue to one slight problem with the rule book being put out as a PDF. It's not like a living, changing document as that file. If there are changes that need to be made because there are errors in publishing, or we decide to do things differently in Vaso, we can't change the online rules. And many of you may have downloaded them anyway. Instead, we have to publish clarifications. And the calculators are a great intro example to that, because there are some errors with the calculator information either on the matrix or in some events themselves that we've already published on our website. So clarifications is a page on our website. So you can see it's virginiaso.org/clarifications. And I can show you also live how to navigate to it. But this is where we publish changes or corrections to different events. And so, for example, we've published one already for Dynamic Planet in both B and C, that the calculator matrix at the end of the rule book has an error in it. It says that class 3 calculators are allowed for that event. That is not accurate. It's actually only class 1 and 2. So we publish that clarification and we abide by all the clarifications that are put on our website. Vaso posts and follows our own clarifications. This means sometimes we do adopt clarifications that Nationals has posted, or we've written clarifications based on Nationals FAQs. But sometimes we don't adopt things that Nationals decides to do, or we sometimes write our own because we want to, tweak it to fit like what we're doing in Virginia. So for our tournaments for Vaso regionals and state, we follow only our own clarifications, nothing in terms of clarifications on the Nationals website. Invitationals should tell you, even if you're going to a Virginia invitational, they should clarify what clarifications they're following, if they're following Virginia clarifications, Nationals, etc. So to show you on the live website where clarifications are found, there's actually 2 different ways to approach this. One of them is middle and high school, and just go to the list of clarifications. That's the page I took the screenshot of. You can sort it to just your division. If you only coach B or only coach C, you can also do it by event, but you also can go to event specific pages. So for example, if I go to that Dynamic Planet page under events, it's also listed on the event page. Okay, so a couple different ways to see that information. We often associate clarifications with build events. There's always a lot more specific information. I feel like that they more often than other events had clarifications, but knowledge events can have them too. We have made things like spelling corrections, but this calculator one is a great example of like how every event, like you should have your students checking for clarifications and being aware of what's published, even if in other years they haven't been on the types of events that have necessarily needed that. Okay, so it's important to check for all of them. Okay. Here's another example of a set of event parameters. So for anatomy, they could have a cheat sheet and they could have a calculator. For forestry, which is one of our identification events, they can bring a binder instead. And it specifies it has to be 2 inches or smaller. And it says each team can bring a binder. Okay, so it's the 2 people sharing 1 binder. Okay. So pay attention to that language for the different events of whether it says each team can bring X thing or each participant can bring X thing. Okay. So for forestry or for events like fossils, binders can be fairly common. It also says that they can have a commercially produced field guide and says that they can like tab it, annotate it, etc. And then they can also bring a list of the National Tree List, which is in the rule book. But just like I mentioned with the creation of the cheat sheet, that's not something that you do up front and like, or like it already exists and then they just use it as they're working through the event. It should be developed through the studying for their event. And I think forestry and fossils, or if you did like rocks and minerals in years past, are good examples of like if students are studying and preparing correctly, the creation of the resource like is the studying. And, you know, they need to know how to use it, right? Having a field guide and you've never opened it is not going to be useful in a time crunch test or a stations-based test. Instead, like they should be practicing with it, be familiar with it. And for my teams, they personally found the creation of the binder to be more useful than the field guide, or they would use the field guide to help create the binder because then they knew where every piece of information was. Okay. It also doesn't tell you the exact information that you should have in the binder. That's part of the process of them reading through the rules and figuring out what things about each tree might they need to know, or like what's some useful information. So the rules are never going to give you an itemized list of like, you need to know this, 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 and this. It's going to give you general topics and expectations, but it's up to the students to kind of piece it out and figure out what is needed for each of those things. Okay. And so that's what the competition block is, right? It tells you in general what's going to be needed. So this is for ecology, which is a unit that's rotating in. And so it's telling you general things, right? General principles of ecology that they will need to know. It's not telling you exactly what they have to know about food webs or what you have to know about nutrient cycling. It's just saying you need to know things about these topics. And so it's not an itemized study guide. The act of practicing and preparing is what kinds of things could they ask about this, right? It's like doing research for a paper. Okay. I'm not telling you the exact things that you need to put in each paragraph. I gave you a general topic, and part of your, task is to piece it out and figure out like, what's the most important stuff to know here? Okay. You'll also see that there are labels that say like Division C, state and nationals only, or nationals only. So pay attention to labels that will tell you what topics will not be at regionals. So if it says states only or nationals only, we won't see them at our regional tournaments. And then for events that are in both divisions, you'll often see like Division C only topics. That means they're not covered in Division B. Okay. So in terms of resources to prepare for knowledge events, there aren't any like set required ones because the task is to seek them out and like gather that information on their own. There are sometimes sample questions that are also provided in the rules. Again, they're sample questions. They're not guaranteed to be on there, but it's kind of giving you an idea of how they may be asked. But they should not only limit their studying to those things. It's just a taste of what might be there. Another example, I had mentioned Codebusters, which is teams of up to 3. This is a knowledge event. That does allow 3 people. And this is one that actually does more directly tell you what's going to be on there because it tells you the types of codes that can be used at a Division B or Division C tournament. But if you don't know how to use the codes, that list is not very helpful. So for an event like this, it's not necessarily about collecting the right information. It's about knowing like what to do with it. Like, okay, it's a Baconian cipher. What do I do with that, right? The practice is in the code breaking. And also there's the part of that of like dividing up the information amongst team members. I remember my code teams would have, instead of all 3 students learning every type of code, they would divide it up and be like, okay, Tamara, you're really good at aristocrats, and Ryan, like you seem to be, you anything that's Baconian, you can do that. And so they would divide it up to have like specialization so that they're not just like all overlapping on their knowledge base. So when they're reading the rules and going through that information, they can also divide it up like that. Use the collaboration of Science Olympiad, encourage that, so that they're not having to learn all the things for every event. All right, questions on general things for knowledge events before we talk about lab events. And just putting a reminder there at the end again that just because an event is the same title as last year does not mean that it has the exact same rules. They will often also put in bold the changes. So like for Chem Lab, they rotate out one of the topics every year and it'll be bolded for what has changed. But you should still read through all of it just in case. Sometimes they miss things that are bolded. But it's good to encourage our students, even the ones returning who might think they know it all, to read through the rules thoroughly to make sure they understand the full parameters of like, what's the knowledge that they have to gain. All right, so for lab events, that's got a little symbol in the rule book with an Erlenmeyer flask on a book. And so this just means a hands-on component. Many of them are like the chemistry events, but I wanted to point out that like Write It, Do It is one of these events as well, which is, a signature Science Olympiad event. It is a favorite where the rules are very short. This is actually most of them. And so the parameters of this event are actually very narrow, like not very lengthy, but it's the practicing and the team dynamic, right, between the partners that is really going to be crucial for them. So this might feel like an event that doesn't have a lot that you have to do during a practice with like researching, because there is none, but it's about giving them the opportunities to like practice the communication. When I write this, what does that mean to you? And playing with, different common items like paper cups, popsicle sticks, straws, etc., and like giving little practice scenarios. And these are things that team members can create for each other. That was always something that my team enjoyed doing, was creating things that the witty team would have to write about. So it doesn't have to fall on you, but that's an idea that you can throw out there to your team for practicing an event that sometimes students don't really know like how they're supposed to practice this. It really is practicing describing and writing and having someone reading that and telling you like how they interpret, when you wrote X, I thought you meant Y. Like, what does that mean? But where I wanted to spend more of like the lab time is chemistry events. So what's notable about the chemistry events is, of course, the safety stuff. And there's a new addition compared to the knowledge events on these event rules that you need to be aware of, which is first, the eye protection. This also shows up in a lot of build events, but this is referring to the goggles they'll have to wear. And then also, often in event parameters, it will tell you like the full list of personal protective equipment that a student will need. So for Can't Judge a Powder or like Chem Lab or forensics, they have to have goggles, an apron, or a lab coat, and have to have skin covered from the neck down to the wrist and toes. And it tells you even more about, tying long hair back, because events could potentially use like flames. And so it's important for them to know that as they're practicing for these events, because if they're actually going to be practicing like wet labs, like doing testing with powders or chemicals or whatever, they should be practicing wearing the safety equipment. Okay. And that also means for some of our teams, especially like elementary school teams, you might not have these things readily at your school, and making sure that you as a coach procure the correct safety equipment or like facilitate getting that for your students so that they're prepared on competition day. So what that means in terms of like when it says eye protection C, there's a page in the rule book that describes each of the categories. But to be honest, it's a little harder to kind of piece through or understand without pictures, or if you're not familiar with goggles. So Vaso put together a personal protective equipment guide. that does have visuals. It's posted for each event that it relates to, but just really quickly for like our chemistry events. So Can't Judge a Powder, Crime Busters, Forensics, Chem Lab. It says like category C goggles are needed. Here's what that means. They look like the picture on the left. They have these vents on the sides, the top and bottom. They do not have open holes. And they need to be indirect vents. So meaning like they're not just like popped open on the top. They actually have to be like closed down so that they're not directly venting. They need to fit tight to the face. So yeah, your team members are going to have goggle lines. Welcome to the Chem Lab life. And so only those type of goggles are approved for those chemistry events. When it says category C, that is exactly what it means. They may be a different color, but they should look like that, right? As we're going to see for the build events, some of them may require like goggles. The type may be different, like category B, where it says Z87 plus on them, and it needs to have that plus symbol on it. Some chemical goggles like will have a Z87 plus rating. You may find pairs of goggles that work for all of your events if they're indirect vent chemical splash goggles that are Z87 plus, but not all indirect vent goggles like that will have the plus on them. So that's something that you're going to specifically need for those category B build event goggles. But for chemistry, no open holes. They will not be able to participate if they have goggles that have those open holes on them. And then lab coats or lab aprons. Actually, the best is like those rubberized vinyl aprons. Our personal protective equipment guide actually has a link if you don't have them already. But like most middle school and high schools have them already from their science labs. So that's what we mean by a lab apron. Okay. So before any student is touching chemicals or practicing with them, they should be aware of what those chemicals are from the rules, and then also have the safety equipment. Okay. And then the next thing, in addition to the safety equipment, is they probably will need to be familiar with other chemistry equipment that they may be asked to bring for a competition. So like on these Can't Judge a Powder rules, it says each team may bring any or all of the items listed on the chemistry events lab equipment list. It's posted on the national website, but it's also in the rule book. I'll show that to you on the next slide. And it gives them the list of possible items they can bring. They do not have to bring all of them, but they can't bring things that are not on the list. So this is going to be a list they can start from to figure out what's going to work for them in practicing for different events. So here's just like a little snippet of the B list. It tells you like by event. Some things I want to point out with this. First, not every event that's chemistry uses the same equipment. So like you can't necessarily use the same box for Crime Busters as you use for Can't Judge a Powder, because Crime Busters, let's say you want to use you want slides and cover slips. Well, you can't have those in the box for Can't Judge a Powder. Can't Judge a Powder, you're allowed to have graduated cylinders, but you can't have them for Crime Busters. Okay. So you're probably looking at having like some sort of separation of kit. Okay. And again, everything on this list it's not required. I always encouraged my team, like for people who were new to an event, as they were figuring out like what the tasks of the event entailed, what equipment would they want to use for it? I know if I were building a box for myself to do Crime Busters, I would not be bringing that entire list. There are certain things I know that I would not use. There's overlap of purpose in a lot of those pieces of equipment. And the act of practicing and getting to know the event is how you help them figure out how to use the tools and which ones they actually want with them. Related to that, Ward Science, which partners with National Science Olympiad, does offer a variety of kits. They have kits by event like Crime Busters, Can't Judge a Powder, and Forensics. And they also have broader chemistry equipment kits. The chemistry equipment kits from wards are like ready to go box for an event like this. They include things that, especially like in Division C, like they have stuff like a ring stand and a burette that you might be using to practice for chem lab. It is not meant to be the box you take with you to tournaments. It's meant for practicing to make, like, if your school just doesn't have that kind of equipment. For the kits by event, they may also have not, things that you don't intend to use, or not the right proportion of what you want. So if you're just starting out, I would encourage you to look at the list in the rule book. You can also look at the list on the wards kits if you're deciding whether or not you want to purchase them. But if you already have some of the things available in the wards kits, it's probably more cost effective to buy pieces of things, maybe like just the chemicals or just certain pieces of glassware, as opposed to the whole kit. The kits as a whole thing can be fairly expensive. They're comprehensive. They have a lot of stuff in them. But also keep in mind, they cannot be shipped to houses. They have to be purchased through a school. So that may also be a restriction for your team. But the kits are not required. We give you the list. So however you procure the things that your students need, again, that's part of the process of them figuring out how to do an event is, what do I need and how do I use it? Okay. All the actual chemicals, especially for the Division B events, you can purchase through a place like Wards independent of the kits, or through other sources. None of them are particularly hard to get a hold of. Okay. And so some things to be aware of is that if you're asking your students to practice wet labs, there are some things that you may have to have on hand as a coach, or, the event mentor. And those are also listed under the event parameters as like the things that the supervisor of an event may provide, like different reagents such as, sodium hydroxide, hydrochloric acid. It'll change by event, but just be aware that like they will need those types of things to be able to simulate the actual like tournament event. They don't have to bring them with them on the tournament day, though. All right, so a recap then of some things just to kind of keep in mind for those events. A lot of it still is going to be the same spirit as the knowledge events of like, here's a list of topics and, prepare based on that list, what, exploring what you think may be included. But in terms of practicing wet labs, safety first, students should be practicing with their personal protective equipment on, and they must be directly supervised by an adult. Okay. So, if that's in your classroom, there needs to be an adult there aware of what they're doing in case something happens. Okay. You should model safety. So if you are showing them how to handle certain equipment or how to use certain chemicals, if it's new to them, you should be wearing your personal protective equipment too. Right. So if you don't have your own goggles, I would suggest having a pair, so that you don't have to share with the students. Okay. And then your school, especially if you're a middle or high school, may have a designated like chemical supply room. If they don't, please make sure that you're keeping chemicals and glassware stored or like separated, locked away when not in use, so that someone doesn't accidentally break something, spill something, and they don't have that PPE on. We do have a safety policy on our website that does also outline some more things about chemical safety, but mainly it boils down to, if you're not sure, contact someone in your building who does. In general, if you have safety questions, like, I'm a chemistry teacher. I'm also happy to help where I can, but some of the things may be like specific to your school circumstance and what kind of things they have available. So people on site at your school may have more answers for you. All right. Build events. So the build events in the rule book have this little symbol. And they're the ones that are also more like self-schedule. And to be honest, it's probably why most of you are here today, is to hear about build events. And Karen Emmons can do a far better job than I can talking about them. So she has joined us this morning to give you an overview and like the important things that you need to know for this season for build events. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Good morning, everyone. I have a cold, so so you don't have to kind of watch me blow my nose periodically. I'm just going to keep my video off, but I'm going to do mostly screen sharing anyway. So, as Emily said, my name is Karen Emmons, and I'm one of the event group leaders here at VASO for the technology and the build events. And I'm also a national event supervisor, and I help write the National Physics Committee rules. So we're going to cover several of the build events today, and I want to say there's actually really two types of build events, right? There's what we think of as kind of the straight build events, and that's going to be air trajectory and tower and robot tour and roller coaster and flight. And then we have ones we think of as hybrid events. And that has a build, typically a smaller build, so not as big a build, and it's paired with a written test. So this year, wind power is a hybrid event, so it has written test and a device. I'm going to throw optics in that category. Optics is a funny one because the students aren't really building; they're coming in prepared to do a task on a build we have, but it's somewhat in the same category, and I'm gonna talk about it still today as well. Just a general note about those hybrid events: the students can do just the written test. So that's actually why these events exist, is to recognize that, to give more opportunities for scoring, because sometimes if you're in a straight build event and your build is not working, you don't have something to bring. But in the hybrid events, you can just do the written test. That is allowed. A general note about build events too, and I'm going to share my screen now. There we go. It's important to realize that the building events, it's kind of a mindset that students have to get used to, and actually parent mentors as well too. It's not a set of instructions, like Emily was saying. It doesn't say build this thing and whoever builds this thing the best wins. The rules are written to present a problem and then allow many solutions to it. And in fact, I can tell you, as somebody who helps write those rules, that every year we constantly discuss, when we're writing the rules, have we left an open-ended enough problem so that there are many solutions to it? So really, it's a much more real-world kind of work task that the students are being given. It's a set of requirements, a set of specs or specifications, if you will. And that's really the task of engineers in our world going forward. And that's part of how we train the next generation of scientists and engineers. But I admit it can be a bit of a challenge initially. And if you don't find instructions, where do you find resources? So I'm going to start actually where to find building event resources. So Emily showed you this, this is our events page. I hope you've been on it a number of times. And I will tell you that we are actively, particularly our social media person, we are actively looking for resources in every event. And every time we find one that we think is valuable, we pop it up onto the event page. So don't forget to look at our event pages, but there are a lot of resources out there. We have a build series. Last year we called it Let's Chat. They were long videos. We did one on every build event, but we found as we came into this year that they were so specific for last year that we couldn't repurpose them. So we're taking a different approach to our videos, our helpful videos that we're trying to give to people this year. And we're doing shorter ones, and we're calling the series Hints and Hacks. And we are, so our hope is that we can have shorter, more focused videos that can live from year to year to year. And if there's a specific part of a video that doesn't, then we can just change out that one. So that is part of why we're doing that. So that's how our video resources are differing. We have kept on a few pages some old Let's Chat stuff. We mark it as for the prior year, so you can, we keep it there if we think that there's valuable things, and I will mention a few of those as we go through. So here we've already started, we've put 4 wind power videos up as part of Hints and Hacks. You can find them on our YouTube page, and then we will always post them also on the specific event page. So we did one on common construction errors, understanding the device testing setup, the wind power test stand, and using a multimeter, because sometimes people don't know how to do that. I'm going to come back and talk about the wind power test stand in a minute, but I'm going to show you a couple of other resources. So we've already got a bunch of wind power up. Optics. Optics is a new event this year, and we have several really good resources on the optics page. There we go. They're loading now. This optics course is, it's a little old-fashioned, and you wouldn't do it in one setting. It's designed to be almost lesson by lesson by lesson by lesson. So if you're trying to help kids learn and go through optics, this is a tremendous resource. And then we have some Science Olympiad, the National Science Olympiad had made some videos, and we've referenced them as well. Robot Tour. If you're a Division C coach, I want to highlight this robot tour presentation. Now, this presentation was put together, it was a trial event at Nationals last year, and it was put together based on those trial event rules. But we had one of our experts, Kira Emmons, has come through, and she has notated it for all the changes in this year. So, so with 2024 updates are in red, so that it highlights all the information, and you can see some pictures and ideas and thoughts in that. That's a great resource as well. Codebusters. The National Codebusters event supervisor has been putting together all kinds of resources, and these are a couple of his, and we cannot recommend them enough. There's this resource site here even has practice problems. Fossils we found a resource that is practice specimen identification. So there's a lot of good resources out there. And I know I've kind of wandered into the not building event realm, but I wanted you to see that we are actively, I also in charge of the website. So we're actively looking to make sure that we put current, interesting, useful resources on these pages. All right. So, and another important thing about these event pages is later in the season, for the build events, we will put a copy of the actual score sheet that the judges will be using to judge the devices. And that is a great resource for testing your own device and making sure that it's legal. You'll look at exactly the score sheet we're using, and that will help also. But those are not prepared yet. So give us another couple months maybe to get those up. All right. As we talk about devices, I want to make a distinction. It's an important distinction between the device and the test stand. All right. So when you think about build events, you think about towers, you're thinking about wind power, and you're realizing that, all right, the kids build a tower, but then they come and they have to test it in some kind of setup at the tournament. And so the device is what the students build themselves and bring to the tournament. And the test stand is what is used to test the device. And at the tournament, the event supervisor provides all the test stand materials. So for your own practice with a device at school or at home, you may need your own setup. Anyone, I want to be very clear about this, anyone, parent, coach, even someone completely unaffiliated with the team, grandparent, can build a test stand and provide it, because that is not part of the device that the students have to build themselves and bring to the tournament. And oftentimes a very scaled back testing setup is plenty good enough. So for example, as I said, tower, the students build a tower to bring to the tournament. But to test any kind of tower, it needs to sit on a testing surface. There has to be a bucket that they can put sand in. Anyone can provide those pieces. And we have actually a document on our tower website about how to put together how to make a test stand setup. A very simple, easy one at home. And it has various stages to pushing two tables together versus making a much more complicated one. What do you have to have? What don't you have to have? So we have a document there for that. And I can tell you that, I want to assure you that in general, Science Olympiad works very hard to make sure that testing devices are usable from year to year. So you can hack together various test stands and then over time invest in perhaps some more official durable pieces. I know Langley's on this call today. I'm going to point them out. Langley, who has been a very, very competitive Division C school since the beginning, did not own an official bridge tower table until a couple of years ago. And they were still being very competitive. I'm assuming they were cobbling together a testing setup by pushing two lab tables close together. So you don't have to go all in. I encourage you to think about, and we are committed. This is my husband Ian and I. We do these hints and hacks. We also work on providing the test equipment. We want to make sure people can test at home. So we're committed to making sure that we provide you some resources for easy ways to test at home so you don't have to spend a lot of money to work that out. And one for wind power, we have wind power is another one of these where the kids, they make a CD with blades on. Well, they don't make a CD. They use a CD and they put blades on it, and that's the whole device, right? But to actually test the voltage that's coming out from a fan and it needs a resistor and a couple, a little bit of wiring, we have put together a couple of videos, one on understanding what the component parts of the device setup are, and then how to build a simple one at home. So anybody can do test stands. So I encourage you to look at your resources and talk to people if you're a new team starting out. Does anybody have any questions on any of that for the moment? All right, so that's going to take me over to kits. Now, Emily talked about kits briefly. She talked about them in the context of chemistry and what's in some of the chemistry kits. And people use a variety of resources to prepare for the events, right? We've been talking about that: libraries, internet, tests found online. Some people choose to use resources purchased from the Science Olympiad store or kits from wards or other vendors. And if you do wish to purchase kits from wards, I will note to you that Nationals has a promo code in the rule book to use for one order for your team. So you would want to collect everything together and order it at once. And I can certainly understand the appeal about kits if you're new and trying to figure out where to start. But I want to say a few things about kits. First of all, kits are intended to start you off on an event. Just purchasing a kit doesn't guarantee a medal. In fact, a quote from the ward's website, this is an exact quote, says, "The 2023 to 2024 Science Olympiad kits were developed to provide an introduction to each event and are not intended to be an out-of-the-box solution for competition. Students and competitors should practice innovation and creativity to make their design their own competition-ready device." So that's an important thing to remember. Also, if you're looking at kits, just because a kit says Science Olympiad on it does not mean it's compliant with this year's rules. Even if it says Science Olympiad certified, please double check all kits. This has been a problem in the past, and it's even true. We've even found a mistake once in a certified for SO wards kit. One year they had the wrong color LED for detector building. So it's important to check carefully. Kits can be pricey. When compared to just purchasing materials separately, kits can vary greatly in price too. You're not required to use the vendor giving the rulebook coupon. And this is has been a more common issue in recent years. Kits can be back ordered frequently. That's been an issue. I've seen many teams get flummoxed when time is barreling down to the tournament and the team hasn't done anything because they've just been waiting on a kit to show up. So it's really important to see when delivery is promised. So as I said, look to see what's in the kit. Is it really worth it to you? Many, many teams do marvelously without kits. But if you want to look at them, I will highlight a couple that I recommend that I think maybe are worth considering. All right. So, and if you're reassured by kits, if you want, that is your place. All right. I'm not trying to tell you not, but there's a couple that I would seriously consider. And this is where I'm going to discuss optics. So in optics, the students are given, there's a written test and they are pulled out from the event to do a hands-on activity at a box that has mirrors and a laser in it and a couple barriers, and they're told what the target is, and then as fast a time as possible they set up the mirrors so that the laser will bounce off of them and will hit as close to the target as they can get. So if you want to practice that task, you can make an optics box, certainly. But I will be honest, and I will say those are very fiddly to build. You have to get the right kind of mirror. They have to be rear reflective. You have to mount them very precisely, because if they're not perfectly vertical, that beam starts to wander and come out of the box. You have to have very square joints on the box. It's a bit of a fiddly setup. And so I have a couple of suggestions around optics. There are optics boxes. I know Ward's makes one, but for what I actually think is not a bad price for the Ward's box. If you order an optics box from another source, you may have to futz with the alignment of the laser before using it a little bit to make sure that the laser comes level out. The laser light comes level out, but you can just shim it. And we'll probably do a hints and hacks to talk about optics boxes. We just started with wind power. But if it's pricey or unavailable, you can also Google laser chess. Laser chess is a very fun game, and it provides many of those pieces where you can simulate the optics box task. So you might have to set up maybe some cardboard or some boundaries or something, but then you get these vertical mirrored pieces and a laser, and you can bounce them off, and those are well set too. So that's another place to look as you're trying to figure out how to practice optics. Another kit that I think that people are very commonly buy is ones for flight. Now, flight is not a regional event, so you don't need to be thinking about flight immediately. But when you get to it, that's pretty commonly a kits event that is much more useful. And really, the work of flight is trimming those airplanes anyway. So I don't have a specific suggestion for a flights kit. I'm not an expert, but if you go on to the Scioli boards, some of the resources, I'm sure that you will see a lot of suggestions about what are really good flights kits. But what I do want to say is we have as you could see, still up on the screen that I'm sharing, I have this whole thing about building a simple wind power test stand. I would strongly encourage you to go that route rather than buying a wind power test stand. The wind power test stand online is very, very expensive. And we have a quick and easy method of putting together something. And if it's an overwhelming thing for you, again, it doesn't have to be the students doing it. So just as I invite you to look at our resources. We will continue to resource. We have the towers, how to test at home, make a quick test stand at home document. So So that's kits. I'm looking at the chat to see if I have any questions about kits or. One final word that I want to say about kits is about our construction policy. So I'm going to tee up. So this is the Wind Power page. If you go to policies on our website, you can see that there's a construction policy on our website. And I would encourage you, your students, and any event mentors or parents that you have working with them to read through the construction policy to understand what we care about as we're judging a pre-built device, right? So the devices, again, that's the device, not the test stand, has to be constructed only by members of the 15-person student team. All right. So mentors can't make cuts because, oh, well, this was a dangerous thing to do. If it can't be built safely by members of the 15-person team, then another method of construction or another method of putting it together has to be done. Now, by all means, show kids how to use tools, watch them like hawks, demonstrate, but do not, and even practice with them. But on anything that they build to bring to the tournament, they have to build that themselves. And that leads to, and while that seems like a very obvious statement, it actually leads to a couple of interesting circumstances I'd like to call out. One is that using old devices. So if you are a school that has been around for a few years, or even just last year, you probably have a wheeled vehicle or a scrambler from last year. You may, you won't have any towers because they get destroyed, but so if you have an old bit of equipment, you might want to go into the closet and bring it out. Well, old devices can't be used unless it was built on by the students who originally constructed that device. Now, those things can be really useful because they can, they can use it as a model, they can use it for inspiration, they can take it apart for parts, but they can't just use it as is unless the student who built it is still on that team. And for those of you fielding multiple teams, we mean the exact team, not just one of your teams. Right. So it's really important to think about who is building the device. And that actually, you'll even want to think about that as you're composing your state team and about what devices and what kids are going to states. Division C coaches, I'm going to talk to you directly here for a moment. In detector building, which is a states only device, but also event, and also in robot tower, the code is part of the build. Right? I know it's not a tangible physical build, but we consider that to kind of fall under the construction policy. They can't take last year's code and present it as theirs unless they worked on it last year. You also can't share code between teams from the same school. Can't just download code from the internet. We may view their code. It is part of their device and it will be evaluated. So think about code as well too. So I think you have the sense of that. But let's discuss that also. We have a use of kits and digital fabrication. So because we want to make sure that kids are doing their own work. If you get a kit, that's fine. But you'll notice that in our language around kits says that we want kits to be substantially modified, meaning we take that seriously. Our event supervisors do their research and they know what kits are out there and what that produces. So if it's a complete kit that says from start to scratch, get this kit and built this wheeled vehicle, then we'll understand that too. We're going to be asking questions about what changes did you make to the kit? And when we say a substantial modification, we're looking for like a structural modification, something about how it works, how it brakes. Did you add gearing? Did you change the braking system? It isn't enough to just add a dowel and a flag or paint it, or, we're looking for something that changes the way that it operates. And if your device was made from a kit, expect the event supervisor to ask questions about the modifications you made to the kit. And then you can obviously see how that falls right into the digital fabrication, our understanding of digital fabrication too. We we love it when they do the CAD work from scratch, but we know there's files out there, so we want those to be modified. 3D printing is an amazing tool. People should be using it appropriately. I mean, obviously, you're not going to 3D print a tower, but we want you to do some substantial modification. We want the students to make this their own device, whatever. So we don't want, last year we had Sounds of Music, and you can find a complete 3D file to download and print a lute, right? Well, we didn't want somebody to just do that where they haven't modified it and all they did was just downloading it and say, here it is, here's my lute that I made. So I think you can kind of see, again, the sense of that. They'll just ask questions. It's not a no-no, but help your kids be prepared to think about what they want to say and about the work that they did on their devices. Any questions about that? Oh, I see something. Let's see what's in the chat here. Hi, for Robot Tour, what surface should the students use for practice? Well, that's a great question. I'm guessing we have to find a 2x2 surface for Robot Tour. And I think it's quite clear that ideally we would want like a gym floor, but I don't know that we get a gym in any of the spaces that we're going to. But it would be a smooth linoleum-like floor like that is what it will be laid out on. Any other questions? And that's a new event for us too, Robot Tour. So we're having a great time planning and thinking about what we're going to be doing with that. All right. A brief note about clarifications, but I'm not going to say much because Emily talked about it. But I want to say is that there's only a few up right now, but our clarifications group is meeting tomorrow. So on Monday and Tuesday, start looking for a goodly number of clarifications to pop up here. We have a list of ones that we're going to be discussing. We're looking at some of the FAQs that Nationals put up. So you're going to see a whole bunch of ones. So please look at these. And one in particular that I'd like that I want you to be looking for is Scrambler. Scrambler typically has a number of clarifications. For example, this is looking ahead, but I know who we are and I know what we're likely to do. We're probably going to say that we're not going to allow the egg to be put in a bag. We're probably, even most importantly, going to say that teams between a school cannot share a propelling device. That's a very VASO thing. So look for that and prepare for that. The rules allow it, but we don't. And this is definitely a spot where you don't want to get tripped up, is in Scrambler. All right. So be looking for substantive clarifications to show up here. And again, they're also on the event pages themselves. So your students should be highlighting that, and you can see, here's Dynamic Planet. The clarifications that were on the clarification summary page also exist on this page as well too. All right, let's take a look at one specific event and talk about reading those rules and how do we think about doing building events with students. I'm going to choose Tower because it's both a B and C event and it highlights a lot of different things. So when I do a building event with students in Division B, when I would mentor Division B students, we would go through the rules. We would sit down in our first meeting and we would have the students read each one of them would get to read a sentence of the rules or whatever. And we'd go around the circle. But after everyone would do one, and we'd stop and say, okay, what does that mean? So this is a good way to help them think through these parameters. They're hard. And when Emily was saying, read the rules, read them again and read them again, I cannot say that enough in the building events. But with particularly Division B students, they do need some help in interpreting what these rules are saying. In C, yeah, you're not going to do that with them. And I never coached C. They're pretty independent. But I'll tell you, I'm going to be honest with you, Division C kids make a lot of construction errors. So they're not reading carefully all the time. Or they're looking to see what the chat is on Scioli or Discord or whatever group they're on. So they could use a self-check too. Make sure that you probably have a group of builders on your Division C team. They tend to congregate by the time they get to high school. And when we publish the score sheets, maybe make task the builders with judging one of the judging their builds or somebody else's build with a score sheet. And to make sure that people are checking and being careful about rules. Every time you read the rules, you will learn something different in a build event. Emily has covered safety, so I'm not going to go over the goggles, but they're really important, especially in tower. Don't practice without goggles. Those shards fly around. Always, anybody who's nearby should have goggles on when you're practicing tower. All right, so then we keep going down. So again, there's the description. This is what the student's going to be able to do. It says the word impound up here. All right, so you haven't seen that in any non-build events. What is impound? Impound is a time in the morning, and Emily I don't think has shown a schedule yet, but here's a mock draft schedule that she put together. She's probably going to show after this. But before the tournament actually starts all the competition rounds, there's a time when in certain events, the students have to bring their device to where the event is going to be judged and leave it there with the judge. That's what impound is. After they've impounded the event, that means they don't get to touch it, alter it, work on it. They don't get to do anything to it. It's in a protected, it's like when your luggage goes off at the airport, and it stays protected until they bring it back out, until it's their competition time. And the reason we have impound, there's two primary reasons for it. One of which, impound is typically in the events that have a parameter that should not be known ahead of time, so that teams that are competing at the end of the day would have an advantage because they could keep working on their device. Like how long is the track in the vehicle event, or something like that. And also it allows the building event supervisors to begin some of their construction judging. So that's what impound is. It's an important thing. There are huge penalties in the rules for missing impound. So be sure to read whether the event is an impound event. Make sure your kids know it is and are prepared. Somebody has to impound the item at tournament. And when we get closer to tournaments, we'll talk more about who can do it, and it'll probably, the specifics of impound will vary by tournament, but that's the basic idea behind it. All right, eye protection, blah, blah, blah. We get down to construction parameters. All right, so the construction parameters are exactly what they say they are. In the build, these are the specs. These are the limitations. It can't be bigger than a certain amount. It has to fit over this. It has to have certain kind of clearance. Every one of these rules has to be read very carefully to figure out exactly what they mean. And a construction error in a build is a big penalty. And when we're going to get down to scoring in a minute, we'll look at that. But sometimes it might vary by Division B and Division C. So keep an eye on that too, right? Maybe there's no maximum height. So you can read through each one of these and think about what are the construction parameters. I'm not gonna cover the specifics in I'm sorry, I may have called it bridge, but tower. Then there's a section about a design log. Some events that are build events have a design log. Some don't, or they might be called charts and graphs. If there is one, have your students actually do that. It's almost like free points, right? Here in division, there's no one, the design logs are optional in B. It's not a bad practice to get them to keep a log or a design notebook so they know what they've been testing and how it's working. But in C, there's actually a multiplier based on the log. Why wouldn't you want to do that? So make sure that they are paying attention. So many teams come without a design log, and that's really frustrating. Then there's a section, and it usually says exactly what has to be in it. Then there's a section on the competition. And this is what's going to happen with the testing. The kids are going to walk in, they are going to present it for inspection and measurement. The teams place their structure on the scale so that the event supervisor can determine the mass. The team will measure the structure height using provided event supervisor materials. So you can see step by step by step what is going to happen when the team comes into the competition area to compete. So these are the competition parameters. Now, the competition parameters, you can get a penalty for doing something in the competition parameters. But I will tell you that our event supervisors are trained such that they will walk your students through this, right? Whereas your students need to be so familiar with the construction parameters, really, really, really familiar with those. The judge is not going to just stare blindly at the kids and wait for them to do something. They're going to say, okay, come in, put your tower on the scale. All right, here's my ruler. You measure that. Okay, now it's time for you to place your tower. So they're going to talk them through this part of the competition. So it's important and useful to know what's going to happen here in the competition parameters, but and to understand that if they have to put the loading block on the tower, where is it supposed to go and so forth. But the event supervisor will also be friendly and helpful with that. Scoring. So it's important to know how an event is scored. Obviously, right? You want to know where are the trade-offs? What are the important things? What am I trying to do? And in this event, the high score wins. It's the load score. So how much does the bridge hold or tower hold divided by the mass of the tower? So a big load, small mass, and then a log multiplier, right? Oh, that log multiplier is huge in Division C. If it's a multiplier of 2 or 3 or whatever the log, I don't know where are the log multipliers. They're in here somewhere. Oh, here's the log multiplier. The multiplier is 1.25 for a compliant bridge. So that's a 25% increase of the score. There's a bonus. Look at that. There's a load scored bonus if they hold the hold load. Which in tower is 15 kilograms. And you can read that in the rules. So it's important to read these things. But I wanted to talk to you about tiers, because you will see tiers show up in some events. So a tier is, excuse me, tiers are, tiers are a way that divide the teams into the legal teams, the less legal towers, and the ones that can't be tested, right? So this is why I was saying it's so important to meet all the construction parameters. In division, because you'll see in tier 2 is any bridge that violates a construction or a competition requirement. And again, that's primarily going to be a construction violation. Maybe they made it too wide or too thin or not tall enough, or whatever the parameters are. If it violates it, it's put into tier 2, which means that every bridge that meets the construction parameters is tier 1. And no matter what those tier 1 towers held in terms of mass, they are going to be scored better than the tier 2 towers, even though the tier 2 towers may have held the whole load. So that's a big hit to be in tier 2 because of a construction error, which is why I'm saying understand those construction errors, have somebody check them. They are a big penalty to it's the thing you want to do is be in tier 1. Make sure you're meeting all the requirements so that you're not violating any construction parameters on your devices. All right, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say. All right, we talked about impound. I don't think I have, I'm happy to answer questions about events or about what I've said about kits, but this is how you go about reading the rules. And I'm not sure if I have a lot else to suggest in this. Anybody questions? Okay, I turn it back over to you, Emily.
All right. Thanks, Karen. So just to like hit the highlights again of what Karen said for builds. Obviously reading the rules, making sure that your students like pick them apart. But then she had mentioned in there about on the VASO webpage, once we have our score sheets ready, that we post those. Far and away the best thing I ever did with my team builders was, print those out and give them a bunch of copies and have them like measure each other's devices and go through the checklists, because it does, it doesn't replace the rules. Obviously there's so much in the rules that's important, but it picks out the like key measurements to like make sure your device is compliant, and like gives them a preview, also like a sense of comfort of like what they're going to have when they talk with the event supervisor, who's literally going to have the same checklist in front of them. So when those are available, highly recommend using those, to help guide like their confirmation before a tournament of like, yep, we're ready. Our device does not have any construction violations and we're going to be good to go. Okay.
I think I have one other final little tip. I'm looking through my notes here to make sure I said everything I wanted to. And the one thing I try to say every year, I notice that I haven't said it, is that when a device needs to be, let's say a device can only be 30 centimeters wide. That's just, I'm picking that out of nowhere. If you build two 30 centimeters, don't make it difficult for us to judge that the thing is legal, right? Build to 29.8 centimeters. Give it that little piece, because things shift in transit, wood expands. Things happen. And if you're, or maybe you're, kids don't always measure perfectly, so teach them how to measure. And if you're uncertain about how to measure well, which really is a skill, there are videos online. So I encourage you to look at some of those. And with 3D printing, let's say you 3D print a part. Let's say you, the thing is going to be, again, can only be 30 centimeters, and you do the CAD file and you enter 30 centimeters. So clearly it's going to be 30 centimeters. Well, I can tell you 3D printers are variable, and they only have a certain degree of tolerance, and we can actually measure it. And a lot of times there's a little overhang. It's slightly bigger than 30 centimeters. So measure, be careful. Look forward to seeing everybody at tournament.
Awesome. Yeah, great tip. For the years that I was on like the arbitration committee, the number of times I was called in to measure something. We never want to be in that situation where it's going to be close like that. So they should take that into account when they construct. All right. So just wanted to remind you, Karen did spend a fair bit of time talking about optics and wind power as our hybrid events. Those also, and detector building is one at state as well for Division C. There's a symbol that is for hybrid events in particular, and that means that there's a test component and the build component as well, or the task. So just know that there's that other additional category, and it lays out in the rules exactly how those events are scored and how they're distributed amongst the written test and the task or build. And also then the same students have to be doing like both parts. Okay. Second. All right. So Karen briefly showed this mock schedule for regional tournaments, and I just wanted to like put that up there again. that this is not necessarily what's going to match all the regionals. I expect Virginia Tech regional to be on a slightly like later start. We also, for some of our larger tournaments, Mary Washington and Fairfax might have like triple rotation instead of a double rotation schedule. But the main things I want to show for this is for our new coaches or people who have yet to do a fully in-person tournament with us, they are full day tournaments. So just a reminder of that when you're setting that expectation for your teams, it is a full day commitment. It's only one day, but it is a full day. And Karen highlighted impound. That is listed as a as a time frame on the schedule. Not all events are impound, but obviously that's also in the rules. And then the event conflicts that I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation are also going to be reflected in the schedule. You will not have your team numbers for a little bit. We have to finish, of course, with registration and assigning regionals. But they will be clustered by team number. You'll see that at the end of the day, we also do intend to have in-person award ceremonies. So that is going to be after all the grading and events are done for the day. All right. Sorry. You'd think I was sitting there that I could have been drinking all this water while Karen was talking. So a couple things I just wanted to highlight to put on your radar again as you're, you have your teams. Now that's like information that you need to share with them in addition to the full day commitment of the tournament. Just the reminder that like for teams on competition day, we will be asking for 2 types of volunteers. One of them we will actually just call volunteers. They're going to be responsible for covering some shifts to do things like work a timer, measure devices, help proctor a written exam, help grade, etc. So now that you hopefully know who your team members are, that's something that you can convey to the families. These are just a couple hours in length. And we have a sign up that we'll do like after like the winter break time. Once everyone's in a tournament and we know like the ask we're going to have for teams. But just wanted to like put that on your radar again to say that early so that families know that that is part of it. The commitment will be slightly different at different tournaments based on the size, number of teams, number of sessions. And in particular, I've mentioned before that like the Virginia Tech tournament will have a reduced ask, as reduced as possible because our Virginia Tech students will be doing a lot of it. Okay. The second type of volunteer, so to speak, that we will need is actually a much larger role and is not just a show up and do something for a couple hours kind of role. We'll be releasing more information about this probably next month. Once we, more teams have been registered and are in regionals and like we have a better idea of like what we're going to need covered. Obviously also the change from Charlottesville to Centerville is going to impact this as well. Because at Charlottesville, we often had a lot of UVA students. But we will be asking teams to put forward names of people who could do certain events for supervising. This is not test writing, but this is a longer commitment for a tournament where they are running the event, like facilitating the event for the day, setting up the event, and grading the event. We do provide an online training for supervisors that we select from your lists in advance of the tournament. So they're not like going in blind. We also have event group leaders who will connect with them to coordinate, who's making copies of the tests, what are the expectations, and prepare them in advance to run the event. Just like with the other volunteers, this is a commitment where like, if a parent is thinking they want to do it so that they can watch their student in an event, like that's not allowed. That's some of the information that we will ask. They can't oversee an event that their child is competing in. And so it is a longer day commitment, and it does require then like someone willing to then not be able to go necessarily and see a build event that, if their student is participating in one. But most of our events that are like knowledge events are like closed door, so they wouldn't be able to watch them anyway. But those two expectations, just make sure that you're like putting that up front with your families so that they can show up for you when we need them, because it shouldn't all fall on you as coaches. And you have to be available to do other things during the tournament day as well. So just wanted you to be aware of that. And thinking about what a tournament day looks like. There's a lot going on, and it's nice if you're not the one having to do all of these things, right? To fill volunteer shifts, to be an event supervisor, because you have students that are going to need help, figuring out where they're going, keeping track of who's going where, keeping track of materials. It's very different than if you were with us last year on a written test day where it was just all, online in your cafeteria or classroom. A lot more movement. So similar to the state tournament, if you've been to one of those in the past few years. So there's a couple policies that we have highlighted already a little bit in different capacities, but I just wanted to centralize it for you as some other information that you should be sharing with your team members, sharing with your families, and being aware of yourself. Just moving forward in those like next components of preparing for your season. One of those is the team composition policy. So hopefully in the construction of your teams, you have followed the 15 students per team policy. You may choose to have a list of extra students like on hand or that can rotate out for different tournaments, but just know that on tournament day, for each team that your school is registered for, only 15 students can compete. So if you have 2 teams registered for regionals, you may put 32 students on a bus, but only 30 of them are competing at regionals that day. And we have you turn in your rosters in advance, but just wanted you to be aware of that. We are not running any trial events at regionals that alternates can participate in. So we don't need to know anything about your alternates. That's just like extra people that you are just keeping track of for substitutions as needed, but 15 people competing per team at a tournament. If you're a Division C coach, a reminder that you can have no more than 7 seniors, 7 12th grade students on one Division C team. So if you field 2 teams and you have 10 seniors that are interested and going to be on your rosters, they will have to be split. All 10 of them cannot be on one team. How you choose to split them is up to you, as long as one team doesn't have more than 7. And then another reminder, I talked about this actually in the Division B open Q&A earlier this morning, but I think it is an important reminder that the teams that you set as we go through and make these plans for regionals, it doesn't mean that you're already setting your state team if your team qualifies. It could be, if you qualify, your state team can be any 15 students from your school. It doesn't have to be any one particular makeup of your regional team. You could bring on new students. And so that gives you flexibility as a coach, but it also can introduce this variable for families of like, well, how is a decision being made? They want to know, right? So I strongly encourage you to share with your team members and and the team families how you make the decisions for a potential state team, if you stack your teams, meaning that you try to put like your most competitive members like on one team, share the strategy up front so that there aren't questions later. Because the great thing is that it's your decision, but the bad thing is that it's also your decision. So that is in our team composition policy. VASO does not get involved in any of that. But something for you to think about as you're moving forward and having to make some determinations. Some of you may also be in the realm of, we just did tryouts and now I have to select my students. I had more students try out than I have spots for, and that also can be a tough spot. So trying to be as transparent as possible about your process, I think, is helpful in the long run. When you have students that then are on your teams, whatever level they are, we do have a parent participation policy as well. And all of these policies you can find on our website. So you can download them, you can link them to whatever you're sharing with families. Under middle and high school, go to policies, and they are all right there. Okay, so these can be distributed in this fashion to families and team members. Okay, so the one we're looking at right now is the parent participation policy, which outlines two important categories: what parents can and should do, and what parents decidedly cannot do. And I think that's good to do up front before any construction of devices begins. Karen touched on that a little bit already with the build events, but set those expectations before they get too deep into it so that you don't end up having to like backtrack on something or scrap a device that's been built or something like that. Okay. So what can parents do? Obviously, make your lives easier by making sure they show up, or that kids show up when they're supposed to. They fill out required forms. You know, you can ask them to do things for the team. Maybe they also will volunteer to do things for the team. They, depending on the structure of your program, parents may be the ones procuring materials for their children's events. Some schools, especially high schools, will do more like centralized team purchasing. It just depends on what you've decided for your school. They can help them find resources to learn about events, especially if they're doing it in like a formal mentoring setup or just in general, like the equivalent of helping them, you know, to find books at a library to do research for a class or something like that. They can teach them how to use tools. That's what Karen was talking about. As long as they think they can do it safely, you can show a kid how to use a particular piece of equipment. And of course, then like on tournament days, they can help pack up, like help the students to pack up and transport materials. And the big asks of volunteering at tournaments and being a great cheerleader for their teams and modeling good sportsmanship are huge things to do on tournament day. So that's all the like really awesome, wonderful stuff that they can do and should do. And then we also have a list of things that they cannot do. And this is reiterating that same thing that Karen mentioned, and it's worth saying over and over again, especially to our parents of younger competitors. Parents cannot construct anything on competition devices. If a student cannot do something safely by themselves, you got to find a different way to do it. Okay, that doesn't mean do it for them. No, go a different route. The students have to do it all. Okay, and we ask those questions of students at tournaments when they bring their devices. The event supervisor is going to want to know how they built it. And they need to be able to say truthfully that they did every step. Okay. Parents cannot test the devices, assemble the devices, or calibrate the devices. They can help them carry it into the building, but they cannot actually fiddle with the device itself. Okay. We have seen parents show up to tournaments before and they're, you know, calibrating a plane in the hallway, and that's not allowed. And we've had, you know, teams get penalties for that kind of stuff happening because it's not permitted by the construction rules. Okay. And then this is going to be an expectation we have like at any tournament, whether it's VASO running one or at an invitational, it's run by other people. Parents should not be entering the competition area, interfering with an event in any way, coaching from the sidelines, etc. They shouldn't be taking pictures of other teams' devices or touching them. We just expect them, you know, like I said, even at tournaments that aren't VASA tournaments, to be respectful of the supervisors and the competition and the other teams. So worth sharing, absolutely, with your families. And we mention it now because even though we'll do calls to prepare for regionals for specifics of tournament day, I know that many of you will be going to invitationals that happen in the next couple months. And so setting that even for those invitationals, I think is a good standard. Karen already talked about the construction policy. That's also worth sharing and reading. So it does detail that same thing she mentioned about devices being constructed only by members of the 15 student team. The use of kits and the digital fabrication stuff is in there as well, all laid out in that one policy. And then this is a new policy that we actually wrote for this year, posted on the policy page about cheating and misconduct. So I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that we have this new policy. Some of you have already seen it, but this does kind of overlap with like parent participation, expectations for coaches and for team members, and just making it really clear up front to the team members that you've selected for your team that none of this is tolerated, and like what the consequences of that could be. So we lay out what's considered cheating, what's considered misconduct during a tournament, and also what can happen during a tournament as a result of that. So it could mean if, let's say, for example, a student presents work that's not their own, let's say detector building, they submit code that isn't their own. And we determine that in the competition, they could get a penalty for that. They could even potentially be disqualified from that event. If penalties are egregious enough and widespread enough, it could affect more than just a single event. It depends on the nature of the cheating and misconduct, and it's not something we ever want to have to do, but we put it in this formal policy so that you can understand that we're serious and clear about the expectation, and that you have this document to then share with your team members and families. Okay. Even at other tournaments, if I'm not at one of the regionals, or if you're going to an invitational tournament, it is expected that you're still abiding by these same sorts of policies. And we have had invitationals in the past that have reached out to us and mentioned incidents that have happened. So it's just a good policy to have no matter where you go, to instill the fair practices for your team of competition. And so you can kind of put together like a policy package in a way to share with your team members. You've been selected on the team, we're looking forward to it, and then also like sharing some expectations. Some teams even have like a team family meeting, like to share all this, especially for our younger students, so that like families are hearing it directly from coaches, that this is what we expect. Okay. Along with the cheating and misconduct policy, the people who are often then investigating potential cheating or misconduct are our arbitration team. Though that's not all that they do. And I wanted to make that clear because they're not just around to try to catch people messing up. Okay. Each tournament has designated personnel that are there to deal with appeals, but appeals can come from you all. They can come from teams, or they could be coming from like event supervisors. So it could be instances where we think someone is presenting work that's not their own, for example, or it could be a team saying, hey, I think this event supervisor interpreted this rule incorrectly, and I want you to look at it. They are there simply to make sure that decisions that affect teams and events are fair and appropriate for everyone at the tournament, and that the rules of Science Olympiad are enforced equitably. So keep that in mind. We'll talk more about like how you can file an appeal as a coach when we get to like the regionals preparation, because it'll actually be in the portal this year, which is really awesome. But yeah, they're not there just to try to catch cheaters. They're there to preserve the spirit of Science Olympiad, and that can work in teams' favor in decisions. It's a support for event supervisors as well. And you may see that, like, depending on what invitationals you go to, that they handle appeals and arbitration differently. But for VASO, we have a wonderful group that takes it really seriously and wants to give the best experience with, the accurate results that reflect student efforts at every tournament. All right, so we're getting toward the end of our little clinic for today. So some things I wanted to remind you of as support for starting the season. Karen mentioned the Hints and Hacks video series. They're up there already for Wind Power. More are coming your way. We post about them on social media when we drop videos, but the fastest way to know is to subscribe to our YouTube. Um, uh, I won't like email about all of them, so just on our website, on our social media channels, you can see when they're posted. Your students should be using the website pretty actively once they're actually getting into their events. So hopefully you'll see them there. And the reminder about like some new clarifications are probably coming in the next couple of days. For competitors also, there are some things provided by Nationals. Nationals website does have resources posted, and they also are doing some student-focused webinars that you may find beneficial. And of course, throughout all of this, send questions anytime to me. Happy to answer. I know that we will be talking many times between, now and regionals. But hopefully today you got the main things about how to guide your students with events, a reminder of resources, and so you have some good next steps for helping your team begin to prepare for competition. So the next step for us, just so that you all are aware, we are going to be putting together the information to send out to teams about what our ask in terms of event supervisors will look like. Trying to give it a little more time for registration, things to settle down. But that's something we're working on. We do have some outside event supervisors that we contact that sometimes will come to our tournaments. So we're trying to, get a more accurate number of what we need from you all as teams. As registrations are finishing, we're assigning people to regional tournaments. And then once we've got those kind of finalized, we'll also have tournament schedules for you. And then, like I said, we're working on event clarifications literally tomorrow. The VASO clarifications team is meeting. And so keep an eye out for those. So that's what we've got for you. What questions do people have that we have not addressed in this 2-hour little training? All right. Well, we will be putting these recordings up on YouTube. If you're a Division C coach, we'll get started at 11 o'clock for our Division C round table. So Division B coaches, thank you for attending, and feel free to reach out directly if you have any other questions after today. But we'll have a little bit of a break, and then we'll pick back up at 11 o'clock for our Division C people.